we're now going to have two sessions. One is going to be on what we are calling the waterscapes of Hyderabad, and the other one on housing and illegality and thinking about this from the point of view of gender. In the waterscapes, the two or three things which I wanted to do. Generally, every do din, among many of the constant features, talking a little bit about water is a very important part of what we do. So the three presentations that we are going to have here, two of them are from Hyderabad Urban Lab, and the third one is from Subhash Reddy. I'll introduce him to you in a minute. Subhash Reddy is he's there. We're looking for you. He's a one-man army for rainwater harvesting in Hyderabad, and every year there's something very insightful that he says. Every year he says something very insightful, and I always look forward to it. And one thing that he said this time is that, 3 years ago I used to think that rainwater harvesting is all about water scarcity, but now I think rainwater harvesting is really about flood control or flood mitigation. And I think that's a very important shift in the way in which we think about water in the cities. The other two presentations, among the many different kinds of work that we keep doing on water, one of them which we were actually able to make some progress on this year is to think about water as something which shapes the rhythms of everyday life. What does it mean for water to be procured from a long distance, brought, processed and circulated through the city, and how does it actually move through the households, and in what ways does it get gendered, right? That's one part of the story. The other thing that we have attempted to do this time, which we've been working again on for a long time, is that the Deccan Plateau, which is a region of extremely chaotic drainage patterns, where water, when it precipitates, flows in multiple directions and accumulates in hundreds of water bodies across the region, is one region where that entire landscape of water as something which flows and accumulates has been completely forgotten. It has been erased, and as a result what has been going on is that every year we have local intense precipitations and we have very, very local flood events. We keep talking about them as urban floods, but they are not urban floods alone. They are also local urban floods. That is, you have floods in Alwal, you don't have floods in Sheikhpet. You have floods in Sheikhpet, you have nothing happening in Dilsukh Nagar. And this very peculiar situation that has emerged is something that we need to counter with a lot of education. So we've been trying to figure out how to make maps and educational material for doing that. So these are the three things that we're going to share with you. We'll start with Vanshika, who has been working on water, everyday rhythms, and the changes that have happened. And then we will have Manish, and then after Manish, who will be talking about the maps that he has been trying to prepare, we will have Subhash Reddy. Okay? Vanshika.
I'll be talking very briefly of the thematics that I've had an opportunity to explore through the course of my research at Hyderabad Urban Lab. But before that, a bit of context into moving into the presentation, which is that this is work that was focused on trying to understand the knowns and the unknowns of the public water supply in Hyderabad. And by knowns and unknowns, I mean that when we were trying to understand how water flows in the city, we realized that a lot of knowledges that have to do with the everyday provisioning of water are knowledges that are not out there, right? Are knowledges that even say the parastatal, which is responsible for giving water in the city, for delivering water in the city, which is Hyderabad Metropolitan Water Supply and Sewerage Board, the kind of knowledge forms also that they generate, for example, the maps of distribution that they have, or the way they describe their divisions of their administrative divisions, visibilize certain things, but they also hide certain things. And the idea of the work was then to see how closest can we get to trying to see those invisible infrastructures as to what's happening behind, say, this map, which tells me that there are 16 divisions of the way water flows in the city. What is it that it's actually not telling me about, apart from telling me, okay, that the city is divided into 16 parts and there should be water reaching in all of them? So when I started my work, and this was something that was as simple, there is a water supply schedule that's there on the website. Each division has a division manager, has a section manager. With that, there is a schedule that's written about as to when water will come in the neighborhoods of that division. And next to all of that would be the name and number of the lineman, which is an important figure that I will come back to later. So the way to go about fieldwork was very simple. You have to call the section manager, you have to seek an appointment with him, and you have to beg for time, because if you go and meet them, out of a 20 minutes interaction, 15 minutes is something that they're on calls, trying to solve कि यहाँ पानी कल आएगा, आज नहीं देंगे तो कल देंगे, आपको आज नहीं दे पाए क्योंकि लाइन में कचरा था तो हम आपको कल ज़्यादा पानी देंगे. All of these micro negotiations are what's going on in that office. So wherever you went, right, I went with, my first question was that, what is it that you think about the leaks that are taking place in the system, right? Because there is some sort of 10 to 15% of leakages that take place in the pipes of the city that is officially allowed, right? That's by international standard, that if there is a water system in the city, then 10% to 15% of leakages are bound to be there, right? That's something that is allowed all over the world, and they not only take place in, say, the global south, but this is something that's permissible all over the world. That's the first question I used to sort of ask mostly. Like, that was a standard template that I would pose to them, and I got a consistent answer in the first leg of interviews, which is that हमारा old system है, हमारे निज़ाम के टाइम का सिस्टम है, और इसलिए उसकी वजह से हमारी पाइप्स भी पुरानी हैं और हमारा तो लीकेज ज़्यादा होगा ही होगा. So I was fascinated with this category of the old. What is this old infrastructure? Like, what is this infrastructure having a geriatric life that, you know, that's being given to me as a template of an answer that I'm trying to understand. This landed me to the Asif Nagar filter beds. The Asif Nagar filter beds is this particular part of the system that's located in the Mehdipatnam military garrison. It's been there since the 1920s. This is a structure that came into place in the aftermath of the Musi floods, where once the Usman Sagar and the Himayat Sagar reservoirs were put into place. The idea of putting these two reservoirs was as much as wanting to tame the river Musi, as much as to cater to the drinking water supply of the city. And since then, this infrastructure has been in place. However, if you look at, say, the manner in which we've gone over our development of, say, the sources from where we get water, if you look from 1920 to, say, 2015, as in when you move downwards, what you see is that the year gap between, say, an infrastructure in place and getting new sources of water, the time gap has certainly reduced. And we further moved away from the city in terms of getting our sources of water. So currently, water from the Krishna would sort of travel roughly 116 kilometers before it enters into the city. From Godavari, it's roughly 172 kilometers. In the 1920s, the source was 15 kilometers away from the city. Yet, this source that's been there since a long time is not in absentia, or say not contributing to the water supply of the city. And that intrigued me to find out as to what is it that makes an infrastructure turn old. What then came about is that the inadequacy of the infrastructure of the Asif Nagar filter beds to actually give water to the rest of the city is not a lack of its own capacity to treat or not treat water, but it's actually the capacity of its interrelationship with the reservoirs in the city to not supply it any water. in that sense, Asif Nagar filter beds is not something that will die or that will become monumentalized as a figure of the past because of its inadequacy to do a function that it was initially installed to do, but it's actually the reservoir not being able to give any water, which then told me that the assumption that has changed the paradigm in which we get water from, say, sources distant away from the city is that we will always have water to obtain. And I think that is a highly problematic assumption. And I think this is an assumption that we need to challenge, which is that flows not only bring water, but bring something else to the city. And I am in the process to find out what else is that flow carrying. I come from Delhi, and when I heard about the Jat reservation Arakshans taking place last year, one of the incidents that struck me was that a method of protest was occupying the Munnak Canal completely. And the crisis of reservation was not just crisis of reservation, but a crisis of the metropolitan city, the capital of the city, not getting any water. And therefore, the entire maneuvering of the protest was around the fact that how is it that Delhi Jal Board then would try to supply water to a city whose one of the predominant channels of water entering into the city have been completely blocked. Now coming to the second part, right, where I was at a point in time where I concluded that a water infrastructure, a pipe, a filter bed, a pumping station is not something that operates in, say, isolated, discrete ways, but is actually interconnected to each other. And it's also how different water infrastructures in the city that will play a part as to how each of these work is when I concluded that fine, Asif Nagar filter beds might just be having just a 25 mgd capacity out of, say, the 600 mgd capacity that Hyderabad demands every single day. But what is the city losing when we lose that 25 mgd capacity to even give water, right? The answer to that was that if Asif Nagar doesn't provide that 25 mgd of water, one is that the answers are not always lying in the quantity, but even if it is just quantity, right? If Asif Nagar fails to provide water to the city, then that means water from some other source has to be rerouted. And that means that, again, there will be a contestation between two different neighborhoods getting water from each other. The next part, which Sir actually mentioned regarding the rhythms, and that's been an important focus of this research, is then how is it that water shapes the rhythms of everyday life, right? I come from a middle class family. I have had the fortune of having motorized pumps in my own house, yet I have woken up every day in the morning seeing someone putting the motor on at 6 in the morning or 8 in the morning. And fortunately, I've had a system where water flew regularly, right? If it wasn't the water, then it was, say, the borewell that gave my house water. I also come from a history where wells were a predominant feature of getting water for my family, right? And that's when water didn't only have a currency of a liquid, but it also had a particular social currency where by providing water to other members in the neighborhood, right, there is a currency of respect, there's a currency of exchange, there are these microcurrencies that one saw erupting, which water held. At that point in time, when I went in as a researcher into areas where two features of water systems in our country became evident. One is that the water supply system currently is an intermittent water supply, which is that 24/7 water, the public water supply system will never offer a 24/7 water supply. And secondly, the value of water is measured through time. So when someone says that you will get water on alternative days, you're not measuring pressure of water. The lineman is actually measuring the hours that he will supply water. At that point in time, what I could see is that there is some kind of a water time that comes into being in the neighborhood. And that water time characterizes the neighborhood in a particular way, not only for that duration, but also in relation to other activities in the day. So I had the fortune to meet two formidable women. One is Lakshmi Aunty, who is our office staff, and she introduced me to certain things that she has to do when water comes. for an hour on alternative days, not only every day, further telling me that to get water in the city is not only a matter of turning the tap on or the tap off, but it's also a matter of having certain storage infrastructures in place. Even if there is, say, a borewell provisioning that my own homemaker in Nalagunta, Jyoti auntie, had, this water, which is the public water, has a premium because this is the water that's most suitable for people to drink, even if they could just simply boil it, for they cannot afford other filtering techniques. What was this water time in two different women that I had an opportunity to interact with for them? For Lakshmi auntie, this water time was marked by a return time, right? In the rhythms of everything that she does in the day, the work that she does, the different houses that she goes to, the different workplaces that she goes to, one call from her neighborhood telling her that water has now come has to have her to go back into the home and go into the methods of storage, go into the methods of procuring. This time is an unreliable time. If it comes at 2:30 today, it may not come at 2:45, or it may not come at 2:30 tomorrow, and is bound to come at different durations. For Jyoti auntie, the method was something else. The water time was a sharing time. And that again got me to think about the currency that water had. This sharing was not a sharing between owners and tenants, but between tenants and tenants. And that told me a kind of gradation that's possible between different users of water based on the storage infrastructure that they have a hands on. And with that, I think with the kind of times that one saw developing with water time, one was also further clearer as to how this time didn't remain stuck in that 1 hour of water supply or 1.5 hour of water supply or even half an hour of water supply, but this unreliability of water supply seeped into other hours of the day because getting water is essential. The second actor that I would quickly throw some light upon is something that I would like to link to precarity. Yesterday when I heard the presentation of the last presentation, which left a commendable impact on me, the crisis of water not being there, right, also made me think about those who actually make the system work for the way it is. No matter how bad the problem is, no matter how abrupt the system is, I haven't yet seen or I haven't yet heard water systems collapsing other than in Delhi when the canal was completely occupied. And then for me to think about who are the actors who are actually making sure that water flows through the city, I got closer to understanding the linemen of the city who agreed to walk with me. Who agreed to me walking with them because they really don't have time to talk. They really do not have anything, they will not say that hum free hai kabhi bhi, right? To catch them, you have to walk with them and you have to have them agree to you walking with them. And that's something that's completely by their discretion. And what that told me is that there is a particular precarity that lies in the task of intermediation. In that sense, the lineman does two kinds of intermediation. One is the intermediation of the flows of the pipes to the tap at home or other sources of water. And the second intermediation that lies here is between the state and the community. And I think that zone is a precarious zone because imagine a situation where you have to deal with obtainable quantities of water, where this comes at you at last minute at 5 AM in the morning telling you कि आज इतना ही पानी आया है, इसी में गुजारा करो, इसी में बांटो, and a community waiting for you on an alternate day only getting water for half an hour. I thought that at that point in time, my worldview shifted from not only seeing that systems are bad, but also seeing no matter how bad they are, who is it that's making it work? On that note, I will hand it over to Manish.
So the topic which I chose was to understand the water bodies in Hyderabad and how do they converge around, how is water bodies converged around the city as well. So to start with, it was I joined HUL this year in October, and at that moment there was a cloudburst activity in the city, and at that point of time, me and Sir had a discussion about what was the situation of the city and how it is happening. And at that moment, we had an idea to actually bring in a kind of bring in people to actually point out what is it and how we could talk about these issues in public, and that was the goal, one of the goals which we had in our mind while making these maps as well. So what we did here was actually with that we started to create visual graphics and visual illustrations with just maps to showcase a storyline of how the city has been conversing with water bodies. So starting with it, the first thing is to create an association with the water bodies. One thing we thought was to map just the water bodies on the map and just the names of the water bodies, so that you can relate to it in terms of a relative field, which is the map. And so you can actually look into the city as with water bodies here. And the main thing what we could actually see was there were names in terms of lakes, ponds, the local names in terms of talabs, and then kuntas and those aspects, and you could actually figure out which area and how it is distributed. And the next thing was to venture into it as a new person to the city. It was easy. It was a good way to actually start with what was city speaking about in terms of newspaper articles, and so I started to make all. Bring all the clippings of the newspaper articles which were circulated in the Google search engine, and just try to see how you could understand these newspaper articles. So what came about was these newspaper articles actually talked about water bodies in just in 4 different aspects. One is encroachment, second is flooding, third is development around water bodies, and the fourth one what we could see was water bodies being toxic. So with this, I started to delve into the city in terms of these 4 topics and try to see how these happened. And with these topics, what we could see was first, there was a map which was already being done as a geoposition map by the HUL team itself, where all the indentation points were actually mapped onto a map. And with this, to understand why was this actually happening, we actually and one more thing we could see was with overlapping of roads, we could see is the inundation was majorly around those areas. And the next piece, to understand that, we could see was the streamlines, which were actually again a map which was created by HUL, and we could see was as this being like Hyderabad being in the Deccan Plateau, we could actually see was there were a lot of there was a lot of terrain, and we could see was there were a lot of ridges which were formed, and because due to that was water flew in all the directions. Basically, it could actually flow from all the directions, and it was unpredictable from which direction it would flow. And with this, this next thing what we could see was while just comparing, this is a map from 1914, and you could see the major points of inundation happened around here, at the Cecil. The reason we could see is basically there used to be a lot of streams actually which used to flow from in that area, and because we've constructed a lot of built forms and other things on those areas, so we could see there was a lot of inundation which was actually happening at that region. And when just comparing over and over in terms of time, in terms of map, we could see was the water bodies being shrinking and the streamlines being occupied, and due to which there was a lot of and again we could see was all the water bodies were interconnected, and we could see whatever happens in the periphery might happen in at the center of the city as well. And to which the next thing what we started to explore was how it was toxic. So again we could see was the water bodies as such were described as toxic bodies, and just So with just the newspaper clippings, we just started to map where and all which water bodies were actually talked about in the newspapers in terms of being toxic, and we could see was the majorly talked area was all in the peripheries, but they were not talked, just the Hussain Sagar was bought as toxic. But over here, one thing we could understand is whatever even happens in the periphery will actually impact your city as a overall, because all the water bodies are interconnected and the water flows from all directions. So with those, that's the reason how all the bodies are toxic in the city. And the second thing what we could see was there was a lot of talk about the cultural practices about water bodies, where during the Ganesh Visarjan we could see was there were a lot of ponds which were created, smaller ponds created to actually to create a space where Ganeshji could be bid goodbye, and for that they actually smaller ponds were created just to make it in terms of the government says to stop pollution, and it also says that to decongest the regions all around the central Hussain Sagar. And what we could see was there were the ponds which were all they were mapped basically in terms of where the Ganesh Visarjan happened and all in terms of where they've created ponds. So we could actually see again here was wherever they created ponds were again they were encroached, and the sizes of the water bodies reduced drastically. And again that leads to a next problem again was who is encroaching and how is water bodies being encroached. So one more thing which came about was in all the newspapers was the agency what hold the water bodies, who managed the water bodies and who were the ownership of water bodies. So with that we could see was the greener box here were actually all HMDA's water body, and all the yellow ones were GHMC's water bodies. But again a question lies to us is, are the government bodies alone the owners of water bodies? Do we actually have rights towards water bodies as such? So that's a question it again brings up. And the next thing what again was to see how and who is encroaching the water bodies. With the newspapers articles we could actually see was they're being demarcated in terms of these are the spots where the water bodies are encroached, and looking at these points we could actually see there are places where government has actually encroached the water bodies in terms of creating walkways and those other infrastructural things. And but the one thing which where encroached and anti-encroachment drives used to happen was just for removing slums around the nalas and the water bodies. So with that we could see major slums were actually near the water bodies, and these were the spaces where they were actually being removed from. And this brings into a question where in the city because bill forms actually holds in memories in terms of history, and how people respond to bill form is an everyday history and it adds to history. And if these memories in terms of bill forms are being removed, so whose memories are being removed? Because the people with good social rights in the city actually are not the encroachments are not removed. So that is another thing which is there, but the local, in sense the socially weaker sections are actually one who's affected, and their memories are what is being removed in terms of anti-encroachment drives. And the next thing to look into was how the development happened around water bodies. With that, one thing what we could see was in terms of the master plan itself, we could actually see all the water bodies which existed in Hyderabad were all developed as green spaces in terms of parks. And all these green spaces actually majorly have an entry fee to enter into the space. And how does this actually affects the whole aspect of meanings of water bodies in everyday life? Because in past what we could see was Hyderabad being a place which had a lot of agrarian kind of lifestyle, where there was a lot of green incense of farmer produce, and there were a lot of dhobi ghats, and then there were also places where people could access to water with steps down to water, and every day used to revolve around water bodies. So that kind of created a meaning for local people in terms of how they see water bodies. But currently, as such, with developments and other government influences, we could see that there's a disconnect in between how people used to look at water bodies, and does that really affect onto their behavior to the water body by throwing in waste, dumping in waste. And the whole thing, again, what we could connect is to the commercialization of these water bodies, where you also see a lot of hoardings being put up near the nalas, and there is an issue as well where floating hoardings have been left in Hussain Sagar and those kinds of things. And again, the next thing is the spectacularizing of these water bodies, because of we talking about, like activists talking about water bodies in other lenses. Government tried to bring up these issues with a larger kind of an showcasing that they're doing a lot about water bodies, but that eventually affects to the city. And are we looking at all of these issues in terms of these lines as well? So that's the end question where I would actually leave the talk with.
Subhash Reddy from Smaran NGO. I think many of you are from Hyderabad only? Okay. Fine. I think we know what's the average rainfall our city per annum. Yeah, it's around 750 mm. Yeah. And last year it was how much? Any idea? Last year, 2016. That's right. Yeah. 1000 mm. And this year, it's little more than 1000 mm, around 1300 mm. So nobody thought that this much rain will occur, and in a short time. Last year September, it was a huge rain. People, from every corner, they are telling enough. The same thing repeated in the month of October this year, and we have seen, what the impact the city we have faced. Okay. Next. Okay, I'm not organized with this PPT, but anyway, I wanted to show the rain, what happened last year, but due to time, we'll just go through this PPT. GHMC asked us a model for rainwater harvesting, and always I call, it's my observation, because I went to Chennai, Bangalore, Delhi and some other states. Then what finally Hyderabad and Telangana needs, then I started calling site-specific suitable rainwater harvesting. But many people are comfortable with, just calling rainwater harvesting. For me, it's not so, because every building, every institute, every individual house requires different designs. And this model we gave to GHMC. It's in 10 acres plot, Nature Cure Hospital at Balkampet. There, this particular area is 2 acres of the 10 acres. Here the entire rainwater of the building and the open area used to go outside. And there's the borewell dug 10 years back, around 1000 feet, no water, it's abandoned. Similarly, one more borewell is that side. So we are able to, due to the gravity, that's the advantage. We found it is going via the borewell onto the main road. So we are able to divert entire rainwater via the pit, filtered slowly, it is channelized into the abandoned bore. Almost 2 acres water, and here we have taken rooftop water and surface water. Surface water, why we have taken, it's very selective. We cannot just take wherever it's available. There are no vehicles parked. So that's why we have taken, it's a clear water. So we are able to take, and 2013 it is done, and surrounding borewells also got good yield, and this also they used for drawing the water once it was abandoned. And 10 tankers they used to get, that is stopped. This is NIFT in Madhapur High-Tech City. Here also, 10 acres campus, one huge rooftop area is available, main building, 3,500 square meters, close to 1 acre, around 35 lakh liters per annum, it's expected. We are able to channelize it to the, next slide, to the abandoned bore, 190 feet, we flushed it, removed the silt. There the water used to stay for 8 days earlier, now it is staying only for 1.5 day. And from there the excess water goes to the new borewell. The third one is the third borewell of the new building. So there they used to purchase 15 tankers per day, 14,000 liters each tanker, 15 tankers per day. In 1 year, they are able to reduce 8 tankers, second year 0 it is. So they are saving some 60 lakhs per annum. 60 lakhs per annum they are saving. This is one more community at Kompally. This is near Western Apartments near Gachibowli. There also the entire water, almost entire buildings are, our planners, they just leave the water into the sewage drains or onto the surface. So everything goes onto the roads. Here we are able to route that right picture, all the outlets to one point, the bottom one. There we dug a new borehole. The existing bore we left. Now the 90% building water is going into the bore, 16,000 SFT. Here one observation they made is that the power bill having same motor, same lift, same common lighting, after this 5,000 they are getting less power bill because of the rise in water table. That's only with one house in Hyderabad. A few more in St. Teresa School. And these are the buildings which are coming up around the city. See, there are 540 flats. See, we used to listen in villages, 200 to 300 families are, average. But this is 540 flats. And those villages used to, in 2,000 or 3,000 acres, it is 5.5 acres. In 5.5 acres, double the families. Of course, water requirement will be the same. Here, once they get problem, they call us, but still we'll try to do the best because of our experience. In the parking area we have done, in the children's playing area we have done, to the bore which can accommodate, which is feasible. Those borewells only we can take because it can take it to the deep aquifer. When we are drawing the water from deep aquifer, so we have to give back. It's in the cellar. Parking, they have given the parking back. Next. That's the last part, before the water, excess water goes out. There's one more. Next. In some other institution. It's in Vijay Mary Nursing College in Begumpet, near Country Club. Here they call it a rain shadow zone. In entire city, rainfall is normal. Here it's less, always less. So here, 2 years not given good impact. But third year, because of last year September rain, equal rain also they received from Hyderabad, same that place. And that from that day onwards, around 6 months, they have not bought a tanker. I think within 3 months they have recovered their money, and that's maybe due to climate change it has come. Next. One more. We have seen institutes, more than 1 acre, 200 acres, and most of them are not doing to the region or the local strata which needs rainwater harvesting. They are just doing, for the namesake, for permission sakes. Even now in Madhapur area, which is on rock, I think not. One video I'll show. This is done in Sangamitra School at Nizampet. 2,000 square meters area. Bought it, that is one single outlet, final outlet, which is 6 inches. It is channelized to a abandoned bore, 9 years old, no water. That's a borewell. So last year it has received 20 lakh liters into that bore. 20 lakh liters average rainfall. You can see the water level, it is not at all rising up. Not even a millimeter, it's just going down. The second video. There are two bore wells actually. So they have done a huge pit. I said pits are not required. Hyderabad has 24 lakh bore wells already dug. 300 are adding every day. So that is enough. With a less space, with a proper bore, we can give the entire water to the deep aquifer. We are drawing from deep aquifer and doing lot of pits, thousands of pits on ground, shallow level. It cannot percolate. It will not. Water will stagnate. There's a pit. You can see back side. Boulders are there, and we have taken a small portion of the area. Here, the second borewell around same rooftop area, 2,000 square meters. They have put a yellow cap. That's new bore motor and cable they have laid for drawing water. It was also abandoned. See, here also the water is not coming up. So 40 lakh liters water last year they have not put onto the roads, not allowed onto the roads. It has gone to the deep aquifer. Now they are retrieving the water. So like that there are lakhs and lakhs borewells in city, and even unfortunately the department gives permission for the pits. The buildings which are constructed on top of the huge boulders or the rocky area. How can we imagine pits doing on the rock area? Not even a drop will percolate. Still, so many huge buildings are given permission like that. You make 20 pits, you make 30 pits, sitting in the office, and the people come for plan. Though they will do it, some may not do it at all. So this kind of method only is suitable for Hyderabad. This only can maximum avoid our flood, which we can give back to deep aquifer. Excess only can go out. Now, entire rain is going onto the roads, from roads to all, wherever it is going. That's very important. If we can do maximum, if there's a delay rain for 2 months, 3 months, this will save us. This practice and the amount of water gone in can save us, and the impact of the flood flash flood rains also can be reduced with a small space within the borewells. In Chellapalli jail, it is 57 acres we have done last year. There are 18 borewells, 14 are dried, 4 are only working. 57 acres, there are vehicles are not allowed. The inmates, the prisoners, the staff has to walk around. 57 acres of rainwater is going out through 3 by 3 feet stormwater drain onto the main roads. This is one bore. There is a road. That's a stormwater drain. Next slide. Sorry, next picture. Sorry. Okay. See, this we have routed that stormwater drain to this borewell. Next. And this second borewell along near the drain. It has a gravity, or we have to create some gravity if there is not there. This is the abandoned bore. Next. Yeah, this is done. See, you can see the watermark there down. So thus last year it has taken the water. This is inside the jail, 4 acres vegetable garden. There are 4 borewells. So luckily there are 2 borewells in the pit. One can be seen, one we cannot see. Here the water used to stay for 3 feet for few days, but now entire water is going into those abandoned bores, and 2 are on the top. Yeah, next. So our campus area itself having a potential to make use like this. This is in Nesa, in Shamirpet. One of the building we have done. And every institute is paying around 30 lakh rupees per month bill. So we can supplement our water needs via this kind of methods. Thank you, Anand. Thank you very much.
All right. So, if any of you have any questions, you can most certainly speak to them after this session. But if you have any very pressing questions right now, we can take 2 questions. Venu.
First of all, very fascinating work. It was also, I was also observing how the roads are sort of being let off. So if insofar as a huge portion of the city is hard surfaces, the hard surfaces of roads, we're only talking about we're talking about taking care of surface runoff in, let's say, residential locations, working with, let's say, the Residential Welfare Association or with particular institutes. So you're trying to sort of mitigate things at that level. But that's not to say anything about the roads, where there are hard surfaces, there is no absorption, which is where the flooding often happens. There are gradients there, which is what happens in Delhi most of the time. A huge portion of the city is roads. And nobody's answerable for that surface area at all, right? And that's probably not within your mandate. But I'm just curious, how come the city never imagines another idea of road networks, which would perhaps be more amenable to absorbing water? So that's...
Great question, Venu. That's actually something for all of us to reflect on. I don't think that Subhash can respond to that in any immediate way. Please.
I mean, if we get this water harvesting structure done, is it always possible that the recharge happens in my borewell and not in my neighbor's borewell? Because sometimes the rock formation is like that.
Yes. It's a great question that comes up from every person who considers rainwater harvesting, and Subhash Reddy knows that. So please, quick response, then we can move on.
Sure. See, to the Hyderabad part, I am telling you, even yesterday, I take photographs at least 1 hour in wherever I go to the city. I pick up photos like, as you mentioned, there the deposit of road, bitumen, some fine sand, all that because no house is doing rainwater harvesting. From their house, from their compound wall comes out, all surrounding, then on the road, all that slowly it erodes, and there is a down level, there is a deposit of 6 inches. I have taken pictures yesterday, just 2 days back. So that is with every locality is happening. That's one thing. And madam, as you asked, this was a question every time, even now they'll ask. But I am going to put a note to the questionnaire which they call me, that if you want to give back, then I am there to help you. Or if you want to ask for ROI, return on investment, I will not come. I have come enough number of times to you all these years. Now you have to give back, you have to save our city. Once you give back, it is for us. They are not thinking, no, they want, immediate, and that should not go to others also. This is really, I will not get digested. Yeah.
My question is, like in farms also they do these harvesting. Like mostly I see in Bharat, like in farms they want to harvest water. But most of the time farmers invest, but then they realize their borewell is not recharged. And a housing society can afford to have that kind of law. Okay, I'm doing, but at least it's benefiting someone. A farmer, how can I handle?
Madam, one technical question is there. It's a common ground property.
Exactly.
So, we are drawing, it's a community source. And if a good number of people does, it benefits really many. But if only one does, it is shared. He will claim only 30% or 40%. 70% goes, to others also. Collectively it has to do. It's same in the rural areas. They have to do similarly.
But the bigger issue is also, this keeps coming up everywhere, and in my own experience, that do we do rainwater harvesting at the individual property level, or is this a community process? What scale do you do it at, right? All of the Baulis, just yesterday we were talking about this with someone, all of the Baulis in Hyderabad, they were rainwater harvesting structures. They don't have well springs beneath that like in Rajasthan. They collect water. They have a hard stone surface on all sides. They have a rocky bed. There's no water coming from beneath the ground. It's water that is coming from all around, going into the well, getting stored and then used, right? So we do have actually rainwater harvesting happening at a community, regional, ward, city level, and that's the level at which it actually work. So if we don't know what that scale is, we need to start experimenting to try and figure out at what scale we should be doing that. Vanshika.
This is not a question on the method of rainwater harvesting or questioning the collective ownership over groundwater that we ought to have. But one thing that I'm intrigued by and want to know is how did the technology of the borewell shift from being a technology that catered to, say, agriculture at a point in time to coming into the city and then catering to the water needs of the city dweller? How did that shift take place?
That I can actually answer right away. It's a very simple historical question. In 1982, in this state, we gave a huge subsidy to electricity for farmers, and that transformed the entire agrarian landscape of Telangana. In 10 years' time, all the borewells dried up, and people stopped actually sinking borewells, or they were suicidally sinking borewells and actually killing themselves at the end of that process. By this time, a very large number of people had invested in bore rigs. And these companies, which were small companies, were traveling all across the country. They were going to Nepal, they were going to Kerala, they were going to Hyderabad. They had the machine, right? It's equipment that you have invested in, and you have to squeeze as much money out of it as possible. So they all come into the city. And by this time, the city's own water sources had dried up, and we have never tried to figure out how to solve this problem. All right.